Welcome, everybody. Whether you're a viewer or a listener, we're delighted to have you on this week's edition of The Kingdom and Its Stories. And just to remind you what this podcast is about, it's about interviewing people who are allowing Jesus to use their hands and feet as his hands and feet to demonstrate his love to those that God brings them into contact with. And so uh, this week we have the privilege of meeting Chris Ngai. And, uh, and Chris, welcome. We're delighted to have you here. And I just want to to give you an opportunity, if you would, to tell us a little bit about who is Chris Ngai, so that those who are watching and listening can know a little bit about your background. Go ahead.
Yeah, I grew up in the church. I grew up with a loving family, grew up in Christian school all of my life, super shy kid, didn't talk to anybody, hardly at all. I had, two friends growing up and I hardly talked to them. And, I just remember growing up and, I got saved at the age of 5 and, but pretty much from age 5 to 16, it was, just kind of struggled a lot. And, I remember there came a point in my life about 16 where I just came to the end of myself. I remember, trying whatever I could to connect with God, and it seemed like whatever I tried to do, I couldn't see God anywhere. I couldn't
Mm,
connect with Him or hear His
mm,
voice. I remember I would try to pray and I would fall asleep. I would try to hear God's voice. I couldn't seem to hear him. Uh, I came to this point where I wasn't really interested in reading the Bible and just struggling a lot with sin and with the world. And it really came to this moment in this season of my life where I was completely dead on the inside, completely just dry,
mm,
and just never struggled wondering if God was real, but just where is he? Like, why can't I connect with him? And then I remember there came a moment when I got invited to this prayer gathering or prayer conference, and the speaker that night began to talk about something I never heard of before. I'd grown up in the church, Christian school all my life. In a sense, I thought I'd heard it all, and I thought I knew it all. But that night, she began to speak about passion for Jesus and just hunger and desperation for His presence. And I never heard anything like that, but I just began to hear some amazing stories of, just young people about my age who would write things in their journal like, God, I long for your presence. I crave your glory. I long to walk through the hallways of my school and to have heads turn because they see the light that you've put in me.
wow.
I
Yeah.
want to love the unlovable, reach the unreachable. And I think there's something about that heartbeat that just began to awaken something in me.
Mm,
I began to realize, oh my goodness, like I think that's what I was created for. I
mm,
think that that's what I need. And so they gave an altar call at the end of this night, and it was a large church, and they gave an altar call for young people 25 and under. And I remember being embarrassed because my family was there. I didn't know if I should go up, but then something inside of me said, if I don't go up in this moment, I'm probably going to regret it for the rest of my life.
mm.
So
You recognize that then at
yeah.
16. Wow.
Yeah, and so I remember going up, I didn't know what to expect, but I just got on my knees, I got on my face along with a bunch of other young people. In fact, the whole altar was filled with young people, and I just began weeping and just crying before the Lord and just crying out like God, would you touch my heart? Would you awaken me? Would you use me in this generation to see revival? And I long for your presence. I need you. And so I just began to cry out to the Lord, and I wasn't expecting that to happen, but I ended up crying for 20, 25 minutes. Snot
Oh,
was
oh,
falling out of my nose. But I just remember something changed in that moment. And, I got up from that moment, and suddenly I could feel the presence of God for the first time. And
Chris.
suddenly,
Wow.
like, I could see him everywhere. and I could hear his voice, and he just became so real to me.
Oh, wow. That's that's like a Damascus Road experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely incredible. And
Contextualized for Chris.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's something that's so important. I think for each of us to know is that God has a personal way he wants to connect with us, a personal way that he wants to encounter us and for us to encounter him. And he wants to do that for all of us. He wants to awaken each of our hearts, and I think sometimes it just he has to bring us sometimes to the place where we come to the end of ourselves, and when
Hmm.
we really just begin to cry out to him like, God, like, I need you, like, whatever it takes, whatever it looks like, I just have to have you. I have to experience your heart, your presence. I have to hear your voice. And there's just something about that hunger and that desperation that I think breaks something open. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you the way that changed me was that I went from being the one of the shyest kids that you'd ever met, that wouldn't talk to anybody, to, months later, I'm asking the question, I was in Christian school. There's about 80 people at that school, and I'm asking the question, how can I go somewhere where people need Jesus? Like, how can I start to talk to people about the love of God? It is almost like, that fear was still there in some ways, but it was almost like this perfect, that love of God began to override that fear to where I ended up going from a small Christian school of 80 to a large public school of 2,400 people. And I
Right.
just began walking up to total strangers, never learned how to share the gospel, but I just began just talking to them about Jesus and, asking to pray for them. And
Talk about a transformation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So how did that experience lead to what you're doing now? And tell us what you're doing now. What has God called you to, and how did what you've just shared with us prove as a launching pad for what God has you doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's almost like another part of the story. There's almost like what the Lord did from that point, from my high school, my college years, and then into the now. This is almost like a midway step that I'd love to share with you.
Tell us.
So I went to my high school. I just started burning with this desire to see revival in my generation. And so I remember just a lot of mornings we'd get up, we'd get there early to school, sometimes with my mom, and we'd just start praying and just crying out for God to move on that campus. And
And this is on public school campus.
public school, yeah. I
And your
mean,
mom was praying with you.
yeah, at different moments she would join me. I would invite friends to come out, and sometimes they would join. But when I encountered the Lord, one thing that was really significant is the Lord not only broke through that dryness and that emptiness in my heart, but he also broke off depression. He also broke off a lot of anxiety that I had, related to just girls, relationships, just in general, just relating to people, and just began to fill me with such a love for people around me, to where I kind of forgot about myself, and all I could see was God's heart for people, and all I could see a lot of times walking to my campus were dead people walking past me every day,
Oh,
and
wow.
it just broke my heart so much that I couldn't live a normal life anymore. All I could think about was that so many people were entering into eternity without God. And so a lot of times, like, I wouldn't be able to hang out with my family or even with my friends, because I would see someone, and just like so much compassion would fill my heart that I would just leave the table and go hang out with them and just
Oh,
start
Chris.
just
Wow.
sharing God's heart with them. And so for about 2 years I was praying on that campus, just really longing to see God move. I never saw revival on my high school campus, but a few people really got touched by the Lord, and they got awakened to the love of Jesus.
Well, there
And
was revival.
yeah, yeah, some personal revival.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I think one thing, the things I was praying for was really, I want to see like a large scale revival on my campus, and so I didn't see that, but I ended up going to Arizona State University. And and when I got there, the reason why I went there is because I would go to these prayer meetings, and everywhere I went for like three or four different churches, I would have a praying grandma would come up to me, and she would say, "Hey, I don't know if you're thinking about college, but God showed me that revival is coming to Arizona State University, and I think you should go there." And so that would happen at one church, totally different church. I'd go there, same thing would happen. And
You're
about the third or
kidding.
fourth time, I'm like, okay, Lord, I think you're trying to get my attention. And so I go to ASU, believing, praying for revival, and I experienced something I've never experienced before. I get there, and I was not prepared for the level of darkness, the level of temptation, the level of isolation that I experienced there for about 3.5 years. I
Hmm.
remember often feeling like I was the only Christian on the campus, even in Christian gatherings and Christian club meetings. I remember constantly being bombarded with temptation, just being overwhelmed by just the spiritual darkness over that campus. And so for 3.5 years, I would pray, God send revival to ASU. And then in the next thought, in the next breath, I would ask the question, but Lord, how could you ever move in a place like ASU? Just to give a little context, ASU was at the time the number one party school in the nation. It was the devil was and still is the mascot of ASU. It was known as a pastors and missionaries graveyard in an entire denomination, and they would actually warn pastors, "Don't try to plant at ASU because nothing grows there whenever you try to plant any kind of church or ministry." And so that's the kind of spiritual condition and just very hostile to Christianity. And so 3.5 years just praying in this little chapel that was basically invisible on the middle of campus. And then what happened is God began to orchestrate something supernaturally. Students began to come together from different ministries. We began to pray. We began to share testimonies, just ask the question, what could God do if we united together and if we prayed together for his spirit to move on this campus?
Right.
And I remember that first semester we were praying, the Lord led us to do 24 hours of prayer out in the middle of campus. And so we set up a tent. The Lord highlighted scriptures in Isaiah about water in the desert, streams in the dry land. And so we started
Hmm.
praying into that. Um, I remember at some point in the middle of that day, we felt led to sing this song. And you may be familiar with it. It's a song called Let It Rain. Michael W.
Yes.
Smith has sung it and others. And so we started just worshiping on the middle of campus, singing, Let it rain. God, open the floodgates of heaven. Well, what happened is in the middle of singing this song, the biggest torrential downpour of rain that we've ever seen in Arizona begins to fall in that moment, and we're just totally blown away. We're like, "Oh my gosh, God, what are you doing?" And it
Right.
continues
Chris,
for the rest of the day.
I want to, I need to interrupt you right now
Yeah.
and just do a station break.
Yes.
For those who have tuned in recently, you're listening to The Kingdom and Its Stories. And we have Chris Ngai, who's been working for a number of years at Arizona State University. And he's sharing the exciting journey that God has led him on the campus of ASU to see revival come. So, Chris, go ahead. Continue your
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the biggest torrential downpour of rain we've ever seen in Arizona begins to fall, continues for the rest of the day, and we just take it as an encouragement from the Lord, like keep going, keep praying, keep uniting. And so the next semester we get together, 3 days of prayer. Somebody gives their life to Jesus for the first time from a prayer meeting, which we didn't even know that could happen.
Right.
Totally mind blowing to us. And then we end up doing 7 days of prayer before the semester ends. And during that time, a young girl comes into the prayer meeting, and students start praying for her, and she gets healed of skin cancer just supernaturally. God touches her. The next
Praise
day,
God.
she's crying, she's calling us. And so the Lord is starting to do some amazing things on the campus. We get to the third semester, and we felt like the Lord said, it speaks to our hearts that He wanted us to do a whole month of 24-hour prayer. And so, we never tried anything like that, but we're just stepping out in faith.
Yes.
And I remember the first week we do these 40 days of prayer. A man walks into the prayer tent, and the first thing he says, he's probably in his 40s, he's a student. the first thing he says is he asks, "Is there a counselor that I can talk to here? Because I'm planning on committing suicide today."
Mm.
And at that point, me and my sister were students. We look at each other, and we said, we'd love to listen. What's going on? And he just starts to open up about, his how he's struggling with drinking, how he'd gotten back into alcohol, how he was losing his family. His wife had kicked him out of his house, and just didn't see any reason to keep going on. And so we just started encouraging him, hey, like the Lord loves you so much, that like what you're experiencing, that emptiness, only Jesus can fill that. And so at the moment where we invite him, do you want to receive Jesus in your life, he starts to get uncomfortable, and he says, well, hey, I appreciate you guys so much, thank you, I think I need to go to class now. And so we're bummed out, we're like, oh God. But then we stop him and say, hey, can we pray for you before you go? And so he's like, okay. And so we start praying for him, and as we're praying for him, the presence of God just comes down into this little
Oh,
10 by
praise.
10 tent. And we don't even know what's going on, but we're blown away. We're like, God's doing something. Afterwards, we ask him, how are you doing? And he says, that the most amazing thing happened while you guys were praying for me. I felt all of that heaviness and all of that sadness just lift off of me. And
Oh,
I feel
wow.
really, really good right now. I feel really light. And we're like, wow, praise God. And then at the end, he says, "Thank you guys so much." Woo! And he just shouts and he walks off. And so it's at that point we're stunned. Like, did God just save a guy from suicide? Like, what
Yeah,
happened?
right. Wow.
Um, a week later, we're in a prayer meeting. God takes over the prayer meeting. There's about 15 or 20 students just out in this little tent outside in the middle of campus. Up to this point, everyone's staring at us like we're crazy. Not many people are coming into this tent. It's really uncomfortable being there, but we're just trying to be obedient and faithful. And then what happens is God takes over this prayer meeting one day, and students began trembling and just like weeping, and just in the presence of God. Other students began praying with this passion we'd never seen them pray with before.
Mm.
And then at some point, without orchestrating it, we all started shouting all started shouting at the top of our lungs out in the middle of this public university, and we started declaring
At
like, "Jeez,
ASU,
yeah, AOC."
where the mascot is the devil.
Yeah, in the middle of the devil's territory, in the number one party school in the nation, in this pastors and missionaries graveyard, we just started shouting and declaring like, Jesus is Lord, Jesus is victorious, over ASU.
Right, right.
And so for 15 or 20 minutes, we're shouting, like this holy boldness comes over us. We're just declaring the kingship of Jesus over ASU and just who he is. And at some point in the midst of this, it's like the heavens just began opening up over ASU, and like the atmosphere began to shift. And from that point on, we began to hear stories every single day of students giving their lives back to Jesus,
Hmm.
of students getting saved, coming to Christ for the first time, of just miracles happening. I mean, just the most incredible stories. We just began to hear them. I mean, all the ministries that were a part of it, they all start getting blessed. They start seeing salvation.
Yeah.
We heard stories of students on their way to the student union to get food, and God would redirect their footsteps into this prayer tent, and they wouldn't even know why they were there or what it was, and they would just start weeping and asking, and
Chris,
students would
wow.
share the gospel with them. And one quick story I'll share with you too is there was an atheist student who was reading a Christian book that someone had given him, and while he's reading it, the words became three-dimensional, like supernaturally. Just the words jumped out literally off the page towards him. And
Hmm.
it so freaked him out that he ends up giving his life to Jesus. And only to find out he wasn't just any atheist on the campus. He was the student president of the atheist club at ASU. And so he gets saved. He has to step down, and then the next guy gets some
He was
power
president of what?
of the atheist club on the campus.
He couldn't stay as president?
Yeah, I guess they must have had a rule about so he steps down. The next guy gets some power, and then he ends up in the 24-hour prayer space, and he's like in tears, and he's asking students,
Oh,
how
Chris.
can I forgive? Like I don't know how it's possible to forgive people. and so they're sharing Jesus with him, and we begin hearing stories of students that are suicidal, depressed, on their way to get drunk or high, and they stop in the prayer tent and they get set free, and they encounter Jesus, and what we began to see is this holy boldness come over the body of Christ, and we just began to see the most depressed students become the most joyful students on the campus, and the most broken became the most alive, and the shyest students became the ones that were chasing other students across the campus, literally like running after them just to ask if they could pray for them and
Oh
share
man.
Jesus with them.
Yeah.
And so God really did something. And so what happened is that from that moment of breakthrough, just ordinary students, just coming together, praying, just getting hungry for God, this 6 year season of revival began to happen at ASU, where I mean, just a move of God beyond any one ministry, any one person, any of us. It was just God moving on the campus. And what
Chris,
it
I don't know if you can, but could
Yeah.
you give us just a sense of how many people have been impacted through this revival in the last,
Mm.
well, you've been there 20 years, right?
So but it was about 15 years. Yeah.
15 years. Okay. So since this began, how long of preparation of prayer and preparation of you guys uh, was it? And then maybe I'm on the wrong track, but I'm just trying to
That's
get
good.
uh, a feel, for what was the preparation
Yeah.
and how many, what has been the impact?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, amazingly, the preparation was about a year or so. It was about just a year of uniting, praying, growing in friendship together as student leaders across ministries, and just growing in vision for revival together. And I would say that maybe half of us had a grid for what revival was, the other half didn't, but we're just along for along for the ride, excited for what
Yeah.
God was doing.
And how
And
many of you were there?
and so at that point, there was about 22 of us, I would say, that were meeting together weekly. And there's about 7 ministries that were coming together for these seasons of prayer. And yeah, so what happened is that, we started off with about 3 to 5 of us the first semester, and then it grew the second semester, it grew to about 200 that were coming out to the 7 days of prayer. And then the third semester, we counted about 400 that came out for that season. So what happened is there was a season of 40 days, but we got to the end of it and nobody wanted to stop. And so we continued for to the end of the semester, about 53 days. It ended up being featured in like the state newspaper, and then it ended up going out in USA Today, and K Love, and it was crazy. But I would say that in the years after that, there were probably thousands of students that came out, because it was on the social center of campus. It was right there where all the,
Right.
the clubs meet, all the demonstrations happen. And so when God began moving, it kind of became this magnet where students started coming there from all over the campus.
Mm.
Just agnostics were coming in just in case God was real and they wanted to leave prayer requests there, and
Just in
but
case he was real. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just so many testimonies, like so many amazing stories. I remember just the first year into this, there's over like 100 pages of testimonies of just that we were hearing from students and from people that had come to the prayer tent. I remember seeing an
Chris,
article.
Chris,
Yeah,
we're running out of time.
yeah, there's so
And
much we could say.
yeah, we could go on for a long time, but there are a lot of people listening that are wondering, how could I be involved in this? You have 30 seconds. What
Yeah,
would you
yes.
say to them?
Yeah, so we are this year we launched a united collaboration known as Pray Campus America, friends across the nation to pray on college campuses and for college campuses in this next year. And the goal is 24/7, day and night worship and prayer. And the goal is just seeing families of revival raised up to pray for the next generation. And so there's 2 ways that we'd love to invite you to be a part of that. And one, we want to encourage you to gather friends, family, small group, church, ministry, and to set aside, one maybe one time a week, or one time every other week, or
10
once a month,
seconds.
and pray for a college campus near you, or one that's close to your heart. And second, we want to invite you to sign up on the website, praycampus.org. Just go to the website, click join the year of prayer, and we want to give you resources to pray for the next generation, and to be a part of what God is doing on the campuses of
Chris Nye,
America.
thank you so much for being with us. God bless you, brother.
Thank you.